Hey, thanks for joining me. My name is James Lee, and this is 5149. Today, I think I'm just going to jump right into it. We're talking about voting today, and I want to start with this graphic, which reflects the results of the 2016 presidential election in terms of the popular vote. This chart is from the 100 Million Project, which is a study commissioned by the Knight Foundation to understand why people don't vote. So as you can see here, Trump, the red part of the bar, got 27.3% of the vote, and Clinton, the blue part, got 28.5%. But of course, because of the Electoral College, Trump became the president. Now the next part is where it gets interesting here. The small yellow portion, the 2.9% other, the third party vote. This part gets a lot of coverage and discussion, way too much probably, and usually in a negative light. It's not like, oh, interesting, look at these free thinkers exploring options outside of our corrupt duopoly. No, it's more like, look at all this bad stuff that's going on. It's your fault because you voted for Jill Stein. You know, I talked about this in a video a few weeks back, but the hate for third parties, I think, is a misguided one, because if we go back to this chart, if we look at the black portion, 41.3% of eligible voters did not cast a ballot in the 2016 presidential election. That is over 100 million people. I mean, imagine if this bar was smaller. That would be a total game changer, and I think potentially alter the electoral map in a big way. Now, unfortunately, I think there is a fundamental deficiency in how we talk about and analyze this group of eligible non-voters. Like, my hypothesis is that while I do hear a lot of messaging around voting, getting people registered to vote, bringing people out to the polls, I don't think either of the two major parties seriously care about or even want to reduce the number of non-voters. Let me explain what I mean with some of the findings from the Knight Foundation's 100 Million Project. The first thing I want to talk about is voter registration. This is something that I think is top of mind. I hear it from the candidates. I see it on Twitter all the time. I also see it from my friends on Instagram. You know, this message of remember to register to vote. But according to the 100 Million study, only 5% of non-voters cite voter registration as their main reason for not voting. So in reality, it seems that the registration aspect isn't that significant in terms of explaining why people don't vote. Don't get me wrong, voter registration could always get easier and better, but I don't think it's really the thing that's moving the needle. And my gut feeling is that I think the politicians and the political parties know this as well. I think the conversation around voter registration is more democratic posturing than actual desire for increased voter participation. It's a little bit like, let me distract by talking a lot about getting registered to vote, but then do all kinds of things behind the scenes to try to suppress the vote. Hear me out. Let's go back to the graphic I showed earlier. So according to this, I see two main reasons why people don't vote. First is that the system is rigged and that their vote doesn't matter. I'm grouping together responses like don't like the candidates, vote doesn't matter, the system is corrupt into this category. This is a feeling that I can empathize with because the system is rigged in a lot of ways, and the majority of politicians we have are essentially corrupt. Lots of examples here to cite, anything from the Republican Party engaging in some pretty shady tactics to suppress minority voting, to the Democratic Party suing to kick the Green Party candidates off the ballot, or simply the party, and the media putting their thumb on the scale and propping up candidates and smearing others. That kind of stuff turns a lot of people off. Just read some of the responses here from the non-voters. This is a lady from Milwaukee. Lack of interest, uneducated. The times that I've spent to get a little bit more educated, all the options suck. I don't feel like one is great, so I'm not going to vote at all. And another from Las Vegas saying that I hate the thought of voting for the lesser of two evils. That just turns my stomach. This is something to be debated, and I think there is no right answer, but the question is it ultimately the candidate's responsibility to earn a vote, or is it the voter's responsibility to cast a vote? Like I said, I don't have an answer, but I'd love to hear people's thoughts on this. But the point I want to make here is that it's fairly obvious that our main parties don't really want to mobilize this crowd of people. I'll just cite the last two election cycles as proof, as the Democratic Party would rather work to win over the Republican votes, the red part of the graph, than to appeal to the people that are in the black part of the chart. One thing I do want to say here is that People who don't vote because they don't like the candidates are often thought of as privileged. I don't really buy into that. I think people vote for different reasons and have different feelings towards what it means to cast a vote. Some people will think of it very pragmatically in that I'll choose the best option I got, but others might view it as an endorsement. And so for them, it's hard to vote for someone who they think is corrupt or even to participate in a system they see as rigged. So once again, this is something that can be debated, but I see voting as kind of a free speech, so I try to respect people in regards to what they want to do with their vote. Okay, so moving on to the other reason that I see for not voting, a lack of time and resources. Don't know the candidates, no time for voting, don't know the issues, no time for learning and deciding. I think this is a significant chunk of people based on this chart. And just to cite another survey responder, voting is very hard to prioritize. If I need to feed my kids or if I need to vote, I'm feeding my kids. As from a male non-voter from Philadelphia. That makes total sense to me. That's reality for a lot of people. According to a Career Builder survey, 78% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck. And that was a survey pre-pandemic. Now, because of the pandemic, the financial situation for many is probably even worse. A recent NPR poll found that because of the pandemic, 46% of Americans are now experiencing serious financial trouble. That's pretty disconcerting. I mean, I have this voter guide here, and it's got a boatload of pages to go through from the president down to the local school board and ballot initiatives. But if I'm like this person in Philadelphia, struggling with paying my rent and finding enough food to feed my family, I don't have time to read this booklet, let alone stand in line for hours at a polling place on a Tuesday. My point here is that the people in power don't really care, because if they did, they would try to do something about it. Open up more polling places in low-income areas so people don't have to wait as long. Expand different ways to vote, maybe make it so that you can vote at work, make Election Day a federal holiday, or at the very least not have it on a Tuesday. In fact, just looking at some of the other countries out there, 27 of 36 OECD nations have their elections on weekends, but not in the United States, of course. All super easy things to do, but I think it's not done because, like I mentioned earlier in the video, I don't think they actually want more people to vote. Now, why do I say that? I'm speculating here, of course, but take a look at this chart, which asks, regardless of whether you plan to vote in November of 2020, if you had to determine who would be the next president for the next 4 years, would you be more likely to vote to re-elect Donald Trump, vote for the Democratic Party's nominee for president, or vote for someone else? The response is split pretty evenly between Trump and the Democrat, but 18% said they would vote for someone else, a third party. They don't want that because it threatens their power. It threatens the current status quo. Like, imagine if you combine the 18% of the non-voters in this graph with the 11% of the voters. That creates an environment for a viable third party. And if there is a reasonable chance for a third party to do well, I think, given how bad the Republicans and the Democrats are, people would more than likely seriously consider that idea. So they can't risk that happening. And what we end up getting is that both parties make it difficult for people who don't have a lot of time to vote, or they try to remove choices from the ballot. And that's the thought I want to end on, is that our political leaders seem more obsessed with maintaining power than maintaining democracy. Because in reading through this really fascinating study, the 100 Million Project, the fact is that non-voters are not homogenous. They aren't a monolith. They are actually quite diverse. I'll show you one final graph, actually, that I found really interesting, because we always think, or at least I had the perception, that non-voters were people who weren't educated or didn't really care, but that's not really the case. 26% of these voters, as you can see here, are college graduates, and 11% have graduate degrees. So that's 37% of the non-voting group. So it makes this group of people kind of unpredictable, just because it's incredibly diverse. And so for those who currently hold power, they might talk a big game about how important democracy is and how they want more voter participation, but they honestly probably rather not open up the can of worms that could result in a complete realignment of politics in America, a realignment where honestly they maybe won't be the winner anymore. Just something I've been thinking about, and let me know what your thoughts are on this, on voting or not voting. I'm actually planning a couple of videos about voting since the election is right around the corner, so this is going to be part 1 of 2 in a series where I take a deep dive into voting and talk about aspects and ideas that I think are important but oftentimes neglected by the mainstream media. I'll be back next week for the next installment, so make sure you are subscribed. Also, take a moment to hit that like button, share this video with your friends and family. That would help me out a lot. My name is James Lee, and as always, thank you for your time.